Richie, before George Floyd, were you guys out on the street covering stuff? Like, were you set up to be the street team at Daily Caller? Did they transfer you to that? Like, once it looked super hot, like how did that work? And what stood out for you in 2020?
Yeah, it's interesting hearing BG's experience as compared to mine, because BG being independent and basically being a one-man band, he's able to go wherever he thinks the action is. And for me, when the pandemic hit, I mean, I was just stricken with fear that I was gonna have to fire my entire video team. So to answer your question of like, were we covering protests prior? For sure we were, but in terms of it being a viable business model, it really didn't capture the national consciousness until after George Floyd. So we would always be on the ground for various protests in DC, but the severity of those protests, excuse me, and the size of those protests wasn't anywhere near what we saw after George Floyd. And, being, I think that's one of the interesting parts about covering these events is that, like, you have one side saying, oh, they're just riot pornographers. And then you have the other side saying that everybody's peaceful. I mean, and that, that nobody's peaceful and that, these are violent things that should be exposed. And we're stuck in the middle, really just on the ground filming day in and day out. And I think what people don't necessarily realize is the amount of times that we're on the ground that people don't pay attention to our content, specifically because, something crazy didn't happen. And BG and our team, specifically Jorge, Shelby, and I on the Daily Caller video team, we always, basically tell the story of whatever happened. So it's not like we're not going to go to an event because we think it's going to be peaceful. And there were plenty of instances over the summer where, we live tweeted the entire event. We wrote up our rap piece. We did our, video highlighting what happened. But the stuff that goes viral, to be completely honest, is the stuff that, goes Auri. And so that's really when people started paying attention. And in a weird way, it actually did kind of, save our on the ground team, because during the pandemic, like BG said, there was nothing going on. There are like 10 people on the video team. We went from interviewing senators and doing man on the streets and covering these protests to basically Skype interviews overnight. So when the riots started happening and we saw the way that the corporate media was covering them, which is going in there with a big camera for 2 minutes. Oh, as you can see, it's very much a party-like atmosphere. Back to you, Tim. And then leaving the zone, and that's their report, and that's how they're reporting on it.
Dude,
it was so clear to all of us on the ground, like that's not the real story. And so once it was clear there's a huge vacuum there, I mean, it was a no-brainer in terms of getting people out there and putting boots on the ground to cover this stuff.
I mean, for me, 2020 was the moment where citizen journalism took over the world, right? Between the two of you guys and Shelby and Richie, for sure. I mean, I was on the street in D.C. on the kickoff of all the George Floyd stuff for that first week, every single night, man. People throwing bricks over my heads at the cops shooting me in the throat with the rubber bullets, flashbangs going off on my head, buildings, 6-alarm fires being set, standing there face to face with people as looking in their eyes as they just run into the store to loot it and set a restaurant on fire and run out. Man. It was crazy, and nobody was reporting on it. Nobody was there. Not a single solitary reporter from mainstream media was there. And the fallout from that can be translated all the way down into something I explained pre-show, where like even my old friends, my actual real friends, did not believe me when I told them that the reason why the city was boarded up all summer was because of the Black Lives Matter Antifa riots, not because of any Proud Boys that weren't there all summer long. And nobody would even believe me because no one was there. I was the only freaking person there. And I remember seeing Olivia Nuzzi and Chris Kalazer, or whatever their names are. And they were just sitting there like way off to the side in the middle of the day, kind of casually observing everything. And then later that they went home and wrote stories about how they were bombarded by tear gas and what it felt like, the burning and everything, as she just stood off to the side with her notepad. So there was obviously a huge gap that got filled. Now, you talked about the economics. I would like to talk about that for just quite a quick second. Like, Brandon, how are you financing this? Because this is important, because your source of financing and your ability to independently cover what you think is important, that's huge today. So like, who are you beholden to anybody, or like how does it work as a citizen journalist who's truly flying all over the country? And by the way, in the chat, people are already asking me, what are you doing with your frequent flyer miles? Quote, asking for a friend. So you're all over the place, man. How do you make it work?
Yes, it's been a very complex journey on that front, but I'm it's like super excited that it's something that has actually finally panned out. So initially, I early on for the years when I was covering this stuff, but before 2020, I would go work oddball jobs and just save up money to be able to then go travel to these different events. The coverage from the events themselves would not be sustainable in terms of it earning enough money to support going back out to more and more places. So that was what I was doing. But of course, that was an unsustainable model in terms of I constantly have to do some other job in order to then go out and do what I actually would really like to do, which is to go and cover these things. And so, in 2020, I basically kind of took a risk because I saw so much was going on. I said, I'm willing to go a little in debt, and I'm just going to try to cover as much as I possibly can and just see if, maybe people are more into the independent reporting. Maybe people would actually like to see just like citizen journalism view from the ground, just kind of straight out to the people, something where like I don't have to get it approved by some producer. I don't have to get it approved by, some network executives that decide what's going to get aired tonight. So I thought, okay, let's just try this out. And as time went on, people seemed to really appreciate that. I got a lot of positive messages, positive feedback, people that said that they were really glad that I was out there to report on these things. And so that just encouraged me to keep going, pushing forward more and more. Some people would then privately support and, send donations and support that way. So that was a huge boost in trying to get to the different places because these aren't nearby each other. Portland, Seattle, Kenosha, DC, they're all in different areas. And so it took quite a bit. Also just sort of on my own front, trying to keep costs low, finding ways to travel cheaply, not being very lavish with any of the trips. I mean, there's some of these where things are so hectic that I don't even have time to go out and buy dinner. So I'm just like snacking on granola bars or stuff like that.
The granola bars that the protesters bring for each other.
Riot diet. It's the riot diet.
That's exactly
Riot
right.
Diet. I have not heard that phrase before. That's a great one.
Would you like a bottle of water, sir? Yes. Thank you.
You're right. All those water bottles are critical. And then over time, outlets would start to reach out to me and they were interested in using the footage for their programs. And that was just like across the board, pretty much every major broadcaster that you can think of at some point or another has reached out interested in using the footage for something. And so that was also a way. So it's sort of it's a combination of the two now, where there's the video licensing and also the support from people that, just want to see the independent journalism itself. And people also do then see the footage used on different news networks and whatnot. But I think what really gets people excited is the initial reports that are out there from the ground, on the Twitter feed or Instagram, wherever it may be, and getting the story out that way.
Totally. Richie, you guys do all of your work exclusively for Daily Caller, or do you guys license it out, or how does that work?
We do. We license it, and contingent on that license is basically, you have to put up the credit. And oftentimes, we'll sell the footage. The other thing that I generally do is earned media is another thing as well. So getting Shelby or Jorge, for example, if somebody requests their footage, then what I'll tell them is, well, I'll give you the footage for free if you have them on the program to talk about it. But if you want to just run the footage, then you're going to have to buy it. So licensing is definitely one peg of the stool. Then obviously we have pretty large Facebook and YouTube presences, which are monetized platforms. So running all the footage of, the night's events, the day's events on those platforms is also a way of making money. But over the course of the summer, for example, when we went to Portland, the first footage that we got on the ground of those, those crazy, basically siege in front of that federal courthouse every night, it just blew up on Facebook and YouTube and was going. But immediately, basically the Facebook, whoever's pulling the levers, they see, oh, wow, this violent footage is being monetized on our platforms. It's going viral. And then you see everything start to get demonetized. So, in that week, basically we had to change our strategy from, okay, I paid all this money to get me, Shelby, and Jorge out here. The hotels aren't necessarily very cheap. You know, like it's thousands of dollars involved, and you sink that money into the trip. You have to make it back, and we have a very small team. It's not like we're not like most media companies where we can just be in the red for months, and that's okay. So every trip, basically, I'm bringing the receipts back and saying, did we make what we spent? Actually, one of the real saving graces was the subscription model, which is we have a Patriots only service. There's a plug for Daily Caller Patriots only.
Plug it.
Basically, yeah, there you go. Basically, I'd go out there in the middle of the riot in Portland with my gas mask on and say, hey, like literally looking to the camera, looking to my phone saying, hey, Patriots, you're not going to see this anywhere else. I'm going to give you an exclusive tour of what's going on right now. 5 minutes, walk around, show them the leaf blowers, show them, the guys with the lacrosse sticks, show them, the tactics that are being used by DHS, and then put that up behind the paywall. And people wanted to see that footage. So if you get 10 subscribers at $100 a year off of one video, I mean, that's paying for everybody's flights. So between those three different methods of monetization, we were able to make it work. There's certainly times, where we gambled on things and it didn't pan out. But then there were other times, where like we were talking about before we went on, where I'm in DC and the BLM snack van gets their window smashed by a white shirt cop, and you make $10,000 off that clip. So then I'm like, okay, now we can fund the next 3 trips because we captured this. And I think the last thing I'll say about that is there is definitely a bit of a paradox there, which is you want to cover these things completely. You want to be a fly on the wall. You want to show when things are peaceful. You want to show when things get violent. You don't want to censor this or that just because some of your audience might have this ideological agenda or whatever. But the paradox there is that it's really it's the violent stuff that people pay attention to. And so this recent piece that came out on The Intercept, it's like taking BG's footage and saying that, like, I would not even be able to tell you what BG's politics are. And I've been to like 6 different cities with him, and we've been through the crap together because that's not what's important to us. You know what I mean? And so for everybody sitting at home on Twitter, what's important to them is how this footage suits their agenda, right? Or what Fox is doing with this footage that BG reported, or what CNN's doing. And that's not our job is to cover it as a fly on the wall and put the footage out there into the public sphere and sell it if we can. And we're not going to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't sell it, it's too violent.
Right.
But at the same time, our job is just to do that. And so like everybody's trying to apply some ideological agenda to what we're doing.
Right.
And we're trying to do the opposite. So it's been an interesting experience in terms of like fighting that secondary battle, not with, people trying to dox you on the ground for, not showing their protests in a savory light, but,
right.
After the fact, fighting with the media to get the actual, the footage out there without the bias attached to it.